Welcome everyone to episode 128 of Raw Sport. My name is Ahmed Al-Houli. We're back with another huge show with a very special guest, the man himself, Mr. Paulie Malignaggi. Paulie, welcome to Raw Sport. How's things?
I'm good, Ahmad. How are you, man? How's everything going?
Very well, thank you. Paulie, huge news in the boxing world this week. We heard the announcement of Zuffa Boxing obtaining a TV rights deal with Paramount. We heard very clear and concise words from the UFC CEO and the boss of Zuffa, Mr. Dana White, saying we will not be working with any of the sanctioning bodies. The only titles we will be recognizing is the Zuffa and the ring title. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean he's making a push for it. I think it's a business model that possibly allows fighters to maybe make a little bit more money when they first turn pro. So I think it can maybe attract certain kinds of prospects, but I think the blue chip prospect, the high level prospect, has such a big ceiling in traditional boxing that I'm not sure that they'll be able to acquire those kind of guys. They may sell it to them as that. I mean, Dana White has never had a problem lying, so they may sell it that way to the fighters and then try to sign them. But ultimately, if you look at what they've done with the UFC, there's a ceiling, there's a cap. It's not that high when it comes to superstar fighters. So they can certainly make you into a superstar. They certainly push you that way. I think they've done a good job of creating superstars and creating household names in combat sports. I think the UFC has done a great job of that. I think that's fairly obvious, being that the average sports fan will know who a famous UFC fighter is, but a lot of times won't know who a famous boxer is. So, in that regard, I think they've done a better job than boxing in terms of creating recognizable names, recognizable star fighters, star individuals. But ultimately, they're the financial aspect of that has been very, very poor, when you compare it to fighters who are superstars in boxing, and fighters who have that potential to rise in boxing. It may not be as popular of a sport as MMA at this point or as the UFC at this point, but the ceiling is much, much higher. So I think there's a good sell for the prospect to grab them. But I think I think in getting maybe the very best prospects, I think only the dumber ones will sign with them. So you may be able to convince some of them, or you may be able to access their managers or their sponsors and maybe convince them to bring their fighter over. And it wouldn't be the smartest business move if you have a blue chipper. You have the very top of the amateur classes that are turning pro. But if you have pretty good prospects, this may be this is certainly um, an avenue here for things to work. It's just I don't think that with a league concept that they're doing. 'Cause essentially, this is a league concept. They can call it whatever they want. This is a league concept. I don't think that you'll be able to have the best access to the very best prospects, because the very best prospects, boxing has a traditional window that you can look at its history, and the very best prospects will have seen the superstars of boxing have made a lot of money that UFC fighters, they can also compare to the superstar UFC fighters, and it pales in the comparison to that. So remain to be seen. Could be fun, could be interesting for sure. But I think it'll sort of be a sort of a sidebar within the sport of boxing. There'll be traditional boxing, and then there'll be this. And you know what? Some of these things are starting to come out, because there's something called Team Combat League in the US, that has started to sort of branch off on its own as well, creating a sort of a different kind of league concept, a team league concept. So there are different avenues of boxing starting to branch out in different ways, that aren't necessarily bad ideas. They're opportunities for fighters to possibly reach out for. But ultimately, I don't think you're going to be able to have the elite the most elite fighters in Zuffa Boxing because simply by the business model, it has a much lower ceiling than what the big potential is.
Paulie, what do you say to those that say Turki Al Sheikh has been the one that's made these cross promotional fights? He's been the one that's saved the sport in the last 24 to 36 months. And Dana made it very clear that contender level will fight under Zuffa, then they'll go up to the championship level will fight under Turki Al Sheikh. So,
Yeah, and I do think Turkey has been responsible for a lot of very good fights. You can't deny that. You can the schedule tells you very clearly. There's been a lot of very good fights that have happened that would not have happened without Turkey Al Sheikh. So, if we look at it from that perspective, boxing has done well with making these fights, regardless of the opinions of well, they could have been staged in different geographical locations or whatnot, whatever. You should really fight fans are happy seeing the fights and having the fights made, and the fighters are happy doing the fights if they get compensated enough. These are star fighters that are under the traditional business model, though. It takes a lot of money to make those fights. It takes a lot of money to, create those fights. And Turkey Al Sheikh has funded them. When you are busting up guys' records on in a league concept, the way the UFC did, the UFC has very good fighters with busted up records, but busted up records because everybody has to fight everybody, and that's fine. That's a fun thing. But what's not fine is when you count those losses against them and then start to use that as negotiating bait to drop their purses and drop what their value is. So ultimately there's a ceiling to everyone in the UFC, and it's very low. So ultimately, even if Zuffa Boxing eventually graduates to championship boxing, where Turkey Al Sheikh will be doing the fights. Ultimately, if you're just picking from the pool of Zuffa Boxing, you're not going to be paying much to those guys because you're going to be using that against them negotiating wise. And if you're taking traditional boxers outside of Zuffa Boxing and matching them with the guys being picked up from Zuffa Boxing, it's going to cost you a lot more money to get those traditional boxers. But the Zuffa Boxing guys will now be under the contract where they won't be able to have the same access to money as the other guys. So if in case you do plan on mixing things up nonetheless with all the more with Zuffa Boxing and the traditional boxing, because in Turkey Al Sheikh, if you notice, he's managed to merge a lot of cross promotional fights. So it does have that potential. But what the cost would cost you from the Zuffa Boxing angle and what it will cost you from the other angle is very different. So if you're only going to be picking from Zuffa Boxing, honestly, you're not going to go anywhere because people are going to want to see the big fights made between the stars with very good records that have been built up. Now, here's a sidebar. The traditional promoter doesn't really make good fights. So, and it's gotten worse. So there is a pushback here where if the traditional promoter continues not to make good fights, maybe there is a chance for Zuffa and Turkey to sort of, even with busted records, to sort of take over here. And though the ceiling would be less for these guys, you're going to start to attract more fanfare to that, especially if you have a business model with Paramount involved and so on and so forth. So there is that opportunity, because if you look at the way boxing has created the stars, the biggest stars, say, in the US right now, or who would you say would be pay-per-view stars? Canelo and Gervonta Davis, right? They've made a career out of ducking the very toughest opposition, so especially Gervonta Davis, of late Canelo's done the same thing. So if you're gonna do it this way, people get turned off, and people do get turned off. That's what has happened to boxing. That's why it has sort of taken a backseat to all these other sports. So there is that as well. If promoters don't start, at least trying to make their stars fight one another, you can build a star. Boxing has shown that you can build a star, but then you have to make the stars fight one another. You can't just keep building a star and then keep selling garbage to garbage men, and just making these, very, very ordinary fights with your star when there's very difficult, very dangerous fights within the same weight class. So, I think it's hard to predict exactly how this will play out, but I think it's going to also be determined by the behavior of everybody involved. And from one side, you're going to have the Zuffa Boxing and their behavior and the way they're going to move. And from the other side, you're going to have the traditional boxing promoters and their behavior and the way they're going to move. We will see, how it plays out. I mean, you can have opinions on it, but it's really difficult to predict in that way. But I do think if the promoters of traditional boxing would just do what they're supposed to do, I don't think there's any way Zuffa Boxing would be able to even push back, because the traditional boxing way has always been financially more beneficial to boxers. But due to the sort of creation of manufacturing of these fake stars, the average fan will that's not a blowhard, that's not a groupie, it will get tired of it. And I've met a lot of people in my lifetime that no longer watch boxing. They were boxing fans when I met them decades ago, no longer watch boxing. So, people do get tired of it eventually. And so if there's enough, there may be enough blowback to where this could even work, but it'll remain to be seen. There's pros and cons to every situation.
Paulie, what I'm hearing on the ground and across the board is people look at this as a fresh air, a breath of fresh air, because you have somebody who's proven himself, who's built a multi-billion-dollar league, and somebody who's got very, very deep pockets. Now, the question that comes into place and the concern that fans have is this. You have Top Rank, who's the biggest promotional company in boxing, and they still don't have a TV deal.
Yeah.
You have Paramount Plus, who's owned by
CBS, Viacom.
Yeah, owned by, don't worry about that, owned by one of the richest people in the world, Larry Ellison's son. Larry Ellison is the owner of Oracle, who's about to buy TikTok as well. Second or third richest person on earth, right? Has the distribution through CBS, Viacom, and if they get TikTok, there's also a means through that. Now, we're seeing this deal into Paramount, with Paramount, translating into a lot more than what it appears on pen and paper, right? So the traditional bunch are stuck in the mud, you can almost say. And this new mob who's come through is really gaining ground really fast and starting off with this TV deal. The only thing that I noticed with the TV deal was there was no details on length or money. So why would you say that was the case if they have so much momentum?
Well, there's like you said, there's a multi-billion-dollar industry that has been created by this side, by Zuffa. And you also have the backing of Turki Al-Sheikh, who's had created a lot of momentum in the sport of boxing. But the traditional names that Turki Al-Sheikh has used to create these big fights have still been in demand to be paid what they need to be paid, because they come from the former business model. The Zuffa business model did, in fact, create a multi-billion-dollar industry, but the multi-billion-dollar industry was for whom? It was not for the athletes. The athletes got the bare minimum, even at the highest level. In comparison to what they're generating, they are keeping very, very little percentage of what they actually generate. As a matter of fact, the UFC contract basically owns you in every way, owns your rights in a lot of ways. I've heard nightmare stories about that sort of situation there. So if that's the traditional model you're going to be using, again, you do have a multi-billion-dollar industry. You may be able to attract fanfare, but this isn't MMA where it's a new sport and you're just grabbing everybody and there's no competition. Sure, the biggest promoters may not have a TV deal right now, but I think as long as, here's the thing, I mean, there's an if here, because if Top Rank continues to lay out and not have a TV deal, yeah, you can make some moves. If PBC continues to make half-ass fights on Amazon and charging pay-per-view dollars for it, of course, you can make a move. Eddie Hearn has his own deal at Matchroom. At ProBox, where I work, we make some pretty good fights. We're starting to up the budget a little bit. Our fights are, I'd say, among the very best in the sport as far as the matchups are concerned. I mean, anybody who watches our network knows that we have among some of the most competitive action-packed matchups in the sport. We are not at championship level though, so people want to see that kind of thing at championship level. But you're in a business where fighters are used to being heavily compensated at championship level, and you are trying to bring a business model where you do not heavily compensate fighters at championship level the way anywhere near the way boxers have always been compensated at a championship level. So there is a sort of dynamic that has to be bridged here. You can talk about all of the money that's involved. It doesn't go to the fighter. The what's the word I'm looking for? The history, the the work, the prior work of Dana White and Zuffa has already shown what they do. They do not. This multi-billion-dollar industry does not include the fighters. It includes the fighters at a bare minimum. It's for them. It's for the power brokers within the business. It's for the industry insiders that are the mega power that owns the league, so to speak. So you know it's different in boxing because you and if you notice, he's doing this in boxing now. Why? Because MMA is starting to branch out a little bit, right? One was created in Asia and it's got some big money behind them, right? PFL started coming up with some bigger money than before, right? So there's a little bit of a pushback.
They've
The
got a new
UFC still,
CEO. Yeah.
yeah, the UFC still the primary MMA brand, but you're getting a little bit of pushback now. And as soon as there's competition with the way you're paying, you're going to start to diminish because you don't pay the way you're supposed to pay. So I also don't find it coincidental that it's now that he's trying to make a move into boxing. That it's now because it's saying, okay, you know what, they're on to me in the MMA world. They finally grew on to me, and now they're, my ability, my ceiling is starting to diminish here. Let me try in boxing. I've always been teasing boxing, and now this may be a time to try to grab boxing, especially if I can travel under the cover, under the umbrella of Turki Al-Sheikh, the way he's been paying fighters, and sort of make it look like a sell where I'm involved with this kind of money, and look what these kind of fighters get paid, even though that he would never do that. Dana White would never pay fighters like that, if it was his own money. So again, they have a business model. It has worked. It has worked in a different industry. It may be a good time to try it in this industry as far as what the potential it has because of the unstable ground that boxing is under right now. But it's still, they're unstable themselves, no matter how much money they have. If they don't, if they don't break up the money the way they're supposed to break it up, they're going to be on unstable ground themselves, regardless. So you'll join an unstable ground, a business that is on unstable ground, and you yourself will be on that same unstable ground, because you're not really bringing anything to the table that is going to attract the athletes that you need, unless they're stupid. And then don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stupid boxers out there. So some of them will be, or not necessarily stupid, but they are from the B league, essentially. They would be the B system, where the next level prospects down, where, okay, this may be a solid deal for them because they wouldn't be able to attract that kind of heavier deal anyway. It's possible. Again, I say this all with a grain of salt because, again, like I said before, it's the behavior of everybody involved that's going to ultimately decide. It's going to go in a lot of different ways on both sides, but it remains to be seen how everybody will behave under these the circumstances presented.
Paulie, one of the key arguments that constantly come up with this UFC fighter pay is that the UFC allegedly brings a lot more value than just money. They say, when you come through our machine, we make you a star. When you become a star, you start making money from deals outside the UFC. And that's something that's carried through by MMA fans. If you go online, you see it. These people believe that wholeheartedly. What we have witnessed ourselves is that, or what we can say that is fact, is that the TKO machine is a very powerful one, and it's more powerful than ever because now they have the UFC, the WME agency, the WWE, they got the Power Slap, they got like multiple sporting entities under one umbrella. So that cross promotion between the different audiences is possible. So
It's
building this,
Ahmad, let me tell you, you're a good sell. They should hire you. You're a good sell. But I tell you one thing. I'll tell you one thing though.
yeah,
Let me straighten out the line for you because you're going a little bit
okay,
crooked here.
yeah,
The star power they generate, they are entitled to everything a fighter does. That's some of the nightmare. I was talking about some of the nightmare contracts that I've heard. So everything a fighter does, an athlete does, whether it's an acting gig, a commercial, another sponsorship, they are entitled to taking their piece. So they own
there
you
you go.
essentially for life. So they know you still have a very small ceiling. Boxing has created the lives of Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, Oscar De La Hoya, Mike Tyson, even, who was broke and came back constantly off of his big name in boxing. Granted, these are the very top, but again, I'm comparing the very top to the star power that the UFC creates, because UFC creates the same kind of star power, right? All of these people become CEOs, or they become superstar level to where you can't get Mike Tyson to show up anywhere without giving him at least $50,000. Oscar De La Hoya owns skyscrapers in Los Angeles and owns a promotional company. Sugar Ray Leonard, I don't think has ever done a day of work in his life since he retired from boxing. Muhammad Ali had an entire estate that has been passed down, and so on and so forth.
Still makes money off his name now while he's in his growth.
There is no UFC fighter that has to not work when they're done. They have to become trainers. They have to work in the business. And granted, a lot of boxers do too. Don't get me wrong. I have to work myself, right? My position was given to me through boxing, but in MMA, only the very top MMA guys can get themselves positions, like this. And the rest who still become championship level, like my level, for example, as a boxer, where would I go? What would I open up a gym? What would I do? You know what I mean? Like, where are they going? What are you doing? If in boxing, the very upper tier is good. I just mentioned the upper tier level. Then there's the next tier, which is like me, championship level like me, which is not superstar championship level, but championship level, where you still have a brand and can go. MMA is only the very top tier, and then the next tier down, what do you do? Where do the Frankie Edgars go? Where do the Max Holloways go? They got to fight till they're 100, getting punchy. Where do they go? Oh, they got to go to bare knuckle, right? Where do they go? Eventually it phases out here, So if MMA had this big business model, they've been around long enough now to where you could show that the business model, at least for your major superstars, has created a guy who became a CEO, who became an entrepreneur, has created, because let me tell you, MMA fans, they're the dumbest fans in sports. Like, it's not even close. I feel like I'm talking to my sneaker when I talk to these people. But remember, a lot of MMA fighters are not dumb at all. I know a lot of MMA fighters as well, and they're actually, matter of fact, MMA fighters are probably smarter than boxers. So it's not for lack of intelligence here. It's not for lack of intelligence that we're dealing with this. So from that perspective, where is it? You're creating a multi-billion-dollar industry for whom? For the elite business people? For whom is it? It's not for the fighters. For whom? What is it doing? Like I said, has MMA, has the UFC created? You say the Gracie brand definitely got a big boost from the UFC, right? But the Gracie brand still work. They created the Gracie brand gyms based on Royce's success in the early UFCs. Maybe that's the biggest name out of Conor as well. But Conor doesn't make the money he claims to make. Conor also,
he made his money in his alcohol brand. That's where he made.
Conor also got a deal. Wound up getting a deal, getting big enough to get a deal that I don't think everybody gets. You know what I mean? Like, I think anybody else will make an alcohol brand, the UFC would, or Zuffa may be entitled to a piece. I don't know what Conor said. I don't necessarily believe everything Conor says. Actually, I don't believe most of what Conor says. I think he's full of shit most of the time. But he has definitely made good money. But most of that money came from where? From boxing. Came from the Mayweather fight. So ultimately, again, you're still running down. Without that Mayweather fight, Conor McGregor is still in the same boat where he's made good money during his career, but it's not CEO level, entrepreneur level money, without that boxing money that came in later, and then was able to push him to fund some of these other entrepreneurial endeavors that he's been going through. I heard he didn't even pay to go and get into BKFC. So he was just given a piece, because BKFC is, although it's a solid brand, it's got a lot of issues that are at this point. I don't have to say, it's not just me that's saying that. The cat's out of the bag there. They got to sell a piece of themselves constantly to new shareholders and so on and so forth. So I was told they brought in Connor for free just to hopefully catapult themselves by his name and give him like a percent. It's not like Connor owns much of BKFC. He didn't pay anything, and I think he has like 1 percentage point from what I've been told. And it's sort of like Jay-Z was with the Brooklyn Nets, for example. I remember Jay-Z when the Brooklyn Barclays Center opened up, and everybody was big on Jay-Z being co-owner. Provikov was the owner of the Nets. Provikov was the owner of the Barclays Center. Jay-Z had less than 1% of the Barclays Center, less than 1% of the Nets. So he was just there as a face. So it's kind of the same thing here. I don't necessarily believe everything Connor says, but okay, you've got that brand that he still used. He was still created in Zuffa, but ultimately he still needed the boxing money to really catapult himself to the entrepreneurial level, and that still so you can't really count him, because without the boxing getting him to the entrepreneurial level, he's just like everybody else that has fought in the UFC, who may be a star at the moment, but then sort of fades out. Ronda Rousey went to WWE. Again, maybe she would have went there anyway, but definitely you didn't make enough money to last you for your lifetime. Again, I'm talking about superstar level people here that the UFC has had involved with them, that compare to the Sugar Ray Leonards, the Oscar De La Hoyas, the Mike Tysons, and the Muhammad Ali. So I have to make the comparison par for par, as opposed to the lesser level. And par for par, all the people that mentioned him, there has not been one entrepreneurial CEO come out of the UFC, come out of a fighting career in the UFC and move on to those things. Not one, that not from UFC money, especially in comparison to, like I said, the Oscar De La Hoyas, and those kind of
even modern day, Canelo, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua,
yeah,
even
exactly.
These guys are all on.
Yeah.
So they don't have to touch thing in their life.
You have nothing to hang your hat on and say, well, no, we're doing this. It's all words. You have a history. You have a track record of lies. Dana White is most things he says are lies to begin with, or he's a salesman to begin with. So you have a track record of lies, but you do not have a track record that disproves what I'm saying. You can call me anything you want. You can't call me a liar. What I just said, you cannot disprove anything I just said. So, and that's with me acknowledging that they are a multi-billion-dollar industry, but the industry is for whom? The industry is not for the athletes and the fighters, and that's what he's trying to bring to boxing.
Okay, so just to clear things up, that was not my opinion. The question, that's what the internet is saying. We're just bringing the other side here.
Yeah,
that's what,
of course, but what's the internet saying? Because boxing internet has been sort of distrustful of Dana White to begin with, and anybody in boxing. So if the internet is saying that, it's who? It's MMA fans, and and we've already established MMA fans we're scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as intelligence. Where there's borderline, it's borderline almost needing special help. So you can't really take an opinion from people like that, especially from a business sense. I mean, these aren't people that are going to get it. They don't even get their own sport. Yeah, they're the only fans that actually watch their own sport. They talk about their own sport, and they still don't. They don't get it. Everybody else, if it's your favorite sport, you usually kind of get it.
It's a bit confusing,
but not. Yeah, well, I don't know.
It's got multiple disciplines. All right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the sport of boxing itself. Right. Why has the sport let this happen? Why has the sport?
Very clear. I mean, there's fights haven't been made. Promoters have sort of manufactured stars. They've manufactured stars, and once they manufacture those stars, they protect those stars. Because now they've worked so hard to manufacture that star that they are worried about that star getting beat. So instead of making the super fights, boxing used to manufacture stars and make stars because to a degree, it's all manufacturing, right? No matter how good you are, you can still have to be manufactured in some ways. And then they would sort of align the stars that had been created, and a lot of those creations obviously were worthy creations. Don't get me wrong. It's not now you're actually protecting people to the point where you're completely manufacturing them. They may not even be at world-class level if you weren't manufacturing them. Back then, they were world-class athletes that, you got them to a point by working towards their promotability and whatnot. And then you match them against one another, and that's where the sport thrived. Now, I think in a hunger and greed, these same people that create and manufacture these kind of stars, and I say that word lightly because boxing doesn't really create stars anymore; they just create products. Now they're worried about this product because it's their main cash cow. So what they do is they keep this product away from any danger, and some of it has to be blamed on an idiot fan base as well. Boxing fans have become dumber. Boxing fans were used to be more demanding of better fights. They were, you couldn't do this back in the day to boxing fans. I think maybe with the creation of social media, you've given a relevance to, sort of giving an illusionary view of things to people, and so you can market things a lot better, and you can market things to look like what they aren't. So I do think that, without the help of dumb fans, you wouldn't be able to do this. You would have to make the matchups. But because you have the help of an idiot fan base, these fighters that have been manufactured into stars, the promoters can match them against, hapless opponents and cash in on it because the idiot fan base will buy their fighter fighting anybody because they don't want to watch a good fight. They just want to watch somebody sacrifice to their favorite fighter, and they'll be happy. So you do have the greed of the promoters creating this kind of product, but you also have, unfortunately, a fan base that has sadly gotten dumber in modern generations. And I don't know if that's a knock on society just being dumber as a whole, or if that's just strictly with boxing fans, but maybe a little bit of both.
Paulie, for many years, we saw fights not happen simply because they were in different promotional companies, and because what you said, everyone was protecting their own cash cow. And we're even seeing it today to the detriment of the sport. Some of these promoters right now are doing the same thing. And one of the classic examples, and I'm going to call out here, is Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach. Great first fight. Controversy, the unscripted happened, the fairy tale story happened. And then Gervonta goes and fights whom? Jake Paul. In an absolute WWE matchup. Right? So people from the outside look at that and say, this sport's a joke. Like, how does that even happen? Standing next to each other with his boots on, with everything on, he doesn't come up to his chest. So these are the things, I think the sport's done it to itself.
Yeah, certainly it has. Well, it's like I said, there's a little bit of blame goes everywhere, right? I mean, first of all, creating the product that was Gervonta Davis would not have been a world-class fighter if he hadn't been carefully manufactured. Not because he's not talented. As a matter of fact, Gervonta Davis is very talented, but there has been rumors from the rumor mill for quite some time that he has no character and he's a quitter, and he's and even since the amateurs, he would be crying in the locker room when he had to face certain fighters. I was told a story where he didn't want to fight Joel Gonzalez in the finals of a tournament because he had already been beaten up by him in another tournament, and he was crying in the locker room because he didn't want to go out to the ring to fight Joel Gonzalez. Joel Gonzalez, who later became a pretty decent contender as a pro, but nothing of the level of Gervonta Davis as a pro. So there's been a reason why they've manufactured him accordingly and kept him away from all danger, So this is also what happens when you create a product that shouldn't be there in the first place. And not that Gervonta is not good, but if Gervonta was fighting good top fighters, this mental weakness would be tested and he'd probably be gone already. He wouldn't be anywhere near the top of the sport and we wouldn't have to hear about him nor talk about him. But he's been created, he's been manufactured, and he's there. So now you have this problem. How do you keep him there? Because now he makes you so much money. You've generated this product. Oh, there's a big threat here. There's a big risk here. We've got to navigate around it. Oh, this fight ended up being a lot tougher than we thought it would be with Roach. We got to navigate around the rematch somehow. So if you hadn't created the wrong product in the first place, you wouldn't have the problem in the second place. But you manufactured a product that shouldn't be there in the first place. So now you have this product in the second place. And that's kind of what has happened. But let's be honest. this goes back to the stupidity of MMA fans as well, because you have the same problem in MMA, but because the brands are locked, nobody actually talks about it. Fans are too stupid to understand. There's a Bellator champion. There's a ONE champion. There's a UFC champion. There's a PFL champion. They should all be fighting each other in that sport. Those are all very good fighters. They should all at least be fighting. Even if you tell me the UFC fighter is the champion, is the best champion, which in some weight classes or many weight classes it may very well be, you should still see the unification of championship fighters fighting one another. So you have the same problem in MMA, but just because nobody talks about it, because again, the MMA fan is actually the dumbest in pro sports. They're actually so stupid they don't even realize they can argue about this. They can bring this conversation to the forefront. So you got such a dumbed down fan base that it's not talked about there. But in reality, the same problem exists in MMA as exists in boxing, in that in boxing, at least, cross-promotional fights, people know they can happen. It takes more to do them, but people know they can happen, so they argue on behalf of them. And MMA, they can't happen, so nobody even argues on behalf of them. It's still the same sport, last time I checked. So PFL championship. Yeah. So the PFL, it should be decided who the PFL, who's the best between this PFL champion in this weight class against the same weight class champion in ONE, and the same weight class champion in the UFC. So boxing gets a bad rap in that regard, because the fans are smart enough to understand that this fight should happen and could happen. But does that mean MMA should just skate the same criticism just because their fans are too dumb to understand the same thing? No, it's not. I mean, I'm not gonna hold boxing fans accountable or boxing accountable for another sport's stupid fan base. That would be unfair, But nonetheless, it's a problem in both sports, and it's a problem that should be fixed in both sports.
And to be fair, the conversation around Ngannou and Jones was a huge one when Ngannou went to the PFL, and they said it can never happen because he's in the UFC. And before that, you had many fighters out of the Bellator stable that were elite fighters that the only way they could fight UFC opposition is if they left Bellator. So you saw that strong arming from.
But even ONE, where you have an entire continent of Asia where there's fighters that we don't even know about, and just because you don't know about them doesn't mean they're not good. That's a continent that has been breeding world-class fighters for centuries, and now just because we don't know about them, we don't argue about them. Like, again, what a dumb fan base. It's actually so stupid, that fan base, that my brain starts hurting if I talk about them too much, because just because you don't know about them, there should be a big demand for these kind of things. Like, you have an entire continent over there of ONE where there's a big brand, there's big money behind it. I'm sure there's good fighters. I'm not telling you that all their fighters will be the UFC fighters. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is these fights are supposed to happen. Top contenders from this promotion are supposed to fight top contenders from this promotion. Champions of this promotion are supposed to unify with champions of that promotion. Just like the demand is in boxing, it should be in MMA as well. And just because the fan base is too stupid to understand that doesn't mean that now that conversation should not happen. It should still happen.
The Asian side of the world isn't represented well in the UFC, and there's a reason why. It's because ONE dominates that region. We saw Demetrius Johnson kill it in the UFC. He lost to Henry.
He went to ONE and got beat. Yeah,
I saw that. He struggled in ONE. He didn't have that same success, and his trainer was a high up executive in ONE championship. Mm-hmm. So you make a very valid point there, Paulie. Asia isn't represented well in the UFC, and there's a reason why. Because ONE championship has taken a huge part of that market. They control that market. Where in boxing, the sanctioning bodies cover the world, and people come from anywhere and everywhere. From Eastern Russia, Eastern Europe, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's like FIFA and football,
Yeah, absolutely.
There's different leagues. There's different leagues. There's different better leagues than others. But ultimately, you have the tournaments that intercede the leagues. You have the Champions League. You have the Intercontinental Cup. So you see the champions of these leagues play the champions of that league. You have that in football or soccer. You have that even in boxing to a lesser degree. But you have these cross promotional fights. When they're big enough and important enough and generate enough money, they should happen more often. I agree, but at least they happen. In MMA, not only don't they happen, it's not even a conversation point. That's how stupid of a fan. You gotta have a really stupid fan base to at least not even have the conversation. Like, to at least not even bring it up.
Absolutely. Okay. We were together in the big fight week when Canelo. And Crawford fought. After that, we saw the numbers come out. 41 million people viewed the Canelo Crawford fight at one stage during the broadcast. 20 million from inside the US. The rest was from outside the USA. 70,500 roughly so tickets sold. Huge billions of impressions online and all the sorts. And this is the coming of the new age in boxing. Turki Al-Sheikh, Dana White, who only attended for the main event. But anyway, we won't go on. Oh, sorry, he watched his protege in the co-main. What do you make of all this fuss?
It was a big event. Listen, I mean, nothing to make of it. It was an event that everyone knew would generate curiosity. Netflix being behind it also helped a lot. It was a fight that generated cross promotional conversation. Nothing really surprised me about it, including the fact that it wasn't very competitive. Canelo had not been at a high level in a while. He was just holding titles hostage. It's part of what the problem has been in boxing that I mentioned a few minutes ago. You know, you had a manufactured champion there who was being allowed to keep the titles because he generates so much money every time he fights. So therefore, to put him against guys that will beat him is not worth the money. And everybody within the business goes along with it. And that's what kills the business ultimately, right? So you try to make a quick buck now, but later on, you've destroyed the entire product you're trying to protect, right? So, you know, Canelo gets beat by a world-class welterweight, essentially. But Canelo wasn't, at this point in his career, anything world-class at super middleweight. So, you know, it's a little bit of a well-played situation there. And, you know, the popularity of Canelo, because he's the product you've created. Crawford being the legitimate best fighter within the sport, regardless of the weight class. And I think it played out the way it was supposed to play out in the ring. You know, the only curiosity was whether Canelo was being just too big, because it was so many weight classes difference that actually the one-sidedness of the fight actually shows you just how low level Canelo was at this point. You know, because you got a guy coming up 3 weight classes and he still beat him handily. You know, so you know, it was a well-sold product, but certainly wasn't the biggest fight you can make in boxing, or the best fight you can make in boxing. It may have been the biggest fight you can make in boxing, but it wasn't the best fight you can make in boxing. Actually, nothing close to it. And I knew that before the fight. As a matter of fact, it didn't even turn out to be the best fight on that show. So in reality, again, it's people getting, you know, because we have so many tools of promotion now with social media, and all kinds of stuff, that people can fall into being sold anything. And they were, you know.
Paulie, numbers
can't diminish the accomplishment of Crawford. Can't diminish the accomplishment of the sell. But again, the sell was because of the product. You created this product. You manufactured this. It's not the best fight that could have been made in boxing. And you know, are you going to keep doing this, or are you going to give us the best fights in boxing? I don't know. I mean, Turki Al-Sheikh certainly has given us a lot of very good fights, but I think, you know, if Turki was going to do anything, he should have had Canelo and Benavidez fight. I actually was pretty unhappy with the fact that he never pushed Canelo and Benavidez, but as soon as Crawford won the fight, he was trying to push Benavidez and Crawford. Like, Crawford just came up from welterweight. You want him to just stick around at super middleweight now and fighting all kinds of super middleweights and light heavyweights? You know, that's kind of ridiculous to me. But why didn't he have the guts to put Canelo in his place? You know, why did he allow Canelo to push him around like that? That's what I wasn't crazy about that.
This might be controversial. I don't think Canelo should fight Benavidez, personly. I think at
this point, I don't either. He doesn't have the belts anymore. It doesn't matter to me. Honestly, at this point, I don't either. But with the belts, he was supposed to. He shouldn't have been allowed to duck him, because you can't hold belts hostage like that. It's not sport.
Yeah, 100%. Numbers wise, were you shocked that it was that number, or do you expect more or less?
No, I expected a good number. Again, Netflix. Anytime Netflix is involved, it's a big platform. It was a well-sold fight. A lot of promotion behind it. It was always going to it was always going to generate a lot of curiosity. Definitely nothing to be shocked about. Now, whether they're going to sell it as, look at what we did and this is what we're going to continue to do in boxing, that I have my doubts about.
That's what they're doing. You know, that's what they're doing. Yeah, that's what Dana's doing. Yeah.
Of course. And that's why I'm saying you've got to be dumb to believe it. But, you know, some people are dumb. But most people, I don't think, are as dumb as they think. And not in this business.
Turkey signed a deal with Boxer recently.
Yes, just saw that. Yeah.
Signed a deal with Eddie Hearn recently.
Mhm.
He's got deals in the US with PBC, with obviously Zuffa. What's this guy doing, man? Like, what's he going
Well,
with
I'll
all
tell
this?
you what, that itself right there shows you that the Zuffa model won't work if you're also allowing these other promoters to have their deals and do what they've been doing the entire time. You know, the Zuffa model's not going to work that way because you're gonna have a league where you're going to knock everybody off. Their records are going to get busted. And then you're going to compare their records to the records of the fighters who are fighting for the traditional promoters, who also have Turkey's backing, I guess, because he's working with them. Those records are going to be shining. These records are going to be all busted. Granted, from the inside, as a fighter like myself, I would know that they're actually even matchups, but it's hard to sell that as an even matchup. Now you got one guy with 7 losses and one guy who's undefeated from the other side, and you're trying to cross pollinate it now and make a big fight. Now it's tough. That's all the more why I don't really understand how Zuffa would compare and succeed against those other promoters, especially now that you're telling me that Turkey has done deals with all of them. I mean, granted, if Turkey's doing deals with all the other promoters, then those promoters are going to continue to work in their traditional fashion. And they're going to be better at this than Zuffa. So the Zuffa model doesn't work unless you're in a business like MMA was, which was barren and it was brand new. You know, it's not going to work in a very established business like boxing.
He has.
My anyway.
Yeah, that's all been announced. So he definitely has. All right, Paulie, it's been a long chat. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. You've been awesome. Do you want to leave us with any parting words?
Nah. I'm actually fighting my own BKB fight October 18th. It'll be on Vice TV. You guys can check it out. I'll be the main event on that show, fighting Tyler Goodjohn, and I look forward to that. I'm not going to be around for a long time. I'm only here for a good time, so I don't know how many fights I'll do, but it's not going to be many. But it's been an interesting preparation, and it's also been you know, it's interesting because usually when I've prepared in the past, I've really highly focused on my opponent and highly focused on on that kind of stuff. But it's really just been highly focusing on myself, you know, and getting the best of myself at this age and challenging myself in different ways and doing different things to adjust and be smarter instead of always working harder, you know. And I think we'll see what the results are, but I have been feeling pretty good. So
Paulie,
that's pretty much the announcement I got right now. And then everybody, check me out on Pro Box TV. We have got some good fights. I'm telling you, man. We just had a smoker of a show last weekend. We had 3 upsets on it. Anybody who watches Pro Box TV and our live events will attest to this. You know what I'm saying? It's not just a sell. Our next live event is November 7th. We've got Tiger Johnson against Nicholas Flaz. That is an absolute smoke show of a main event, and it's some good fighters on the undercard as well. Erdenbot, and who's a Mongolian fighter, very good fighter, and Akitsugi as well, a good solid Japanese fighter. Very good product at Pro Box TV. I would tell people to check us out, especially our live events. We do talk shows at Boxing Scene Today and whatnot, but our live boxing on Pro Box is really, really something to watch. And if you're a boxing fan and you haven't tuned in, I think you're missing out.
Paulie, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much. We wish you all the best in your upcoming fight. People, check out Pro Box TV. You're guaranteed 50-50 fights. Thank you very much, Paulie. Take care. Take care, everyone. Catch you